Rockingham financially, and I think if those for you who are green eye shade types, I want them to think of that because I think it's a good basis for comparison. So as I said, I'm going to walk over here briefly and just kind of touch on a couple of things. Oh, we have a very complicated governance system, as most of you know. We have a high school board and a high school district that encompasses 4 towns: Athens, Grafton, Rockingham, and Westminster. Westminster has its own town board for elementary school. Rockingham has its own, and Athens and Grafton have a district in common. High school is essentially the same, combined into one municipality, as you will. The supervisory union is essentially their joint venture. That's a place where curriculum is worked out, where transportation is worked out, where special ed is worked out, policies to a very large extent are worked out, to the extent that we can do stuff in a consolidated fashion where it's governance by consensus is the model here. And it's worked fairly well, but sometimes people aren't sure what it is we do. Grafton, Athens together operate an elementary school, and it's also, at least in a titular form, are responsible for 7th and 8th grade students. So that's what we're doing. I don't know if everybody knows all the members of our board or who's here tonight, but we have Kathy Seattle from Grafton, who's on our board. Harold Noyes, who is not here tonight because he had a conflict, from Athens. Krista Gay, who is an alumnus of this school, not that long ago, is another member from Athens. Lynn Morgan is from Athens. I'm from Grafton, and Hardy Merrill is from Grafton, as I think virtually everybody here knows. So that's who. There's the folks who meet a couple times a month and work out policies, work out track the costs, and track operations of the school. You have a bottom line budget that we're proposing, and a warning has been put out. And I want you to notice the bottom line number that's in the warning, and it is for expenses next year of $1,756,793. Now, you should know that that is our portion, the taxpayers' portion of a budget that includes money that comes from the federal government, Title I money, for example. There's ESSER money that's coming in for construction and for some of the health maintenance issues that we're dealing with right now. But this is our portion of the budget, and it's going down by roughly $20,000. However, the per pupil cost is going up, not a lot, but it's going up by $700. And the reason for that is because we have a lower student count than we used to have. And we're paying for that. The state has a rule that cushions this loss of students, but it means that we get roughly 3% less money each year from the state until either our student count goes up or it comes in equilibrium. But that's how the system works. So we're still in a situation where for most people, your tax rates will actually be lower, and the overall cost is lower, but there is a stop date on this process. And Hardy's been doing most of the real work on the finance for this district, and I'm wondering if you might want to say a couple words, Hardy.
Artie, could you just point to us where you are in this?
Excuse me?
Could you point to us where you are in this?
Okay.
What page? should we
You have
go
to
to?
go in to page 62 with the one schedule, and before that starts on about 53. So,
Thank you.
basically, Jack just touched on the education spending for equalized pupil. Last year, that was $20,802.90. That was derived from a budget that was $1,776,984, so a little bit higher than what it is this coming year. Now, what we had last year, according to the AOE, was 85.42 equalized pupils in this district, which resulted in the equalized education spending per pupil of $20,802. This year, we have a budget again of a 1,756,793 that Jack just alluded to, but we're going to have some revenue coming in. About $80,237 is coming back to the SU because they were favorable to budget in 2022, and that's our portion of that we'll be getting back. And we're going to apply some of the surplus that we generated a year ago from 2021, which was $350,000 surplus. So we're going to use a small portion of that, $75,000, and that will give us a net budget of $1,601,556. Now, the state says this year, instead of that 85.42 pupils, we only have 73.17. So when you divide that into our budget, that comes up with a education equalized pupil cost of $21,888.15. So that's up slightly. Now that, if you divide that by the, well, there's two things. Then you come to what is going to be your estimated equalized homestead tax rate. Now, last year, the AOE said that, and the legislature, that our yield, which is what it should cost, was $13,314. And you divide that by the equalized spending per pupil, and that gives you your equalized tax rate for the district, which last year was 1.5625. This year, the AOE is saying that it's going to be 15,479, up significantly. Now, I think that may be a little high because the legislature is the one that finally settled this. But because of all of the problems that are going wrong statewide with CLAs and the fact that towns are need to reappraise, like 80% of the towns of the state need to reappraise, and that's an impossibility. So, but you have to divide the CLA to get to the final tax rate. So anyway, last year if it was 13,314, this year 15,479. You divide that into the 21,888, and our homestead tax rate is going to be 1.4141. We're down by 14.84 cents. So that's a combination for Athens and Grafton. Now that's what I would consider the optimistic. At a worst case scenario, I would say that the estimated yield could be 14,500, which would mean that we would have a 5.3% reduction. I'm leaning that it's going to be closer to the higher number than it will be to the lower number. Are there any questions on that? Because this is a very complex subject. Now I'll go on from there. And I have actually calculated based on what is in this book for the high school and what is in this book for us, WNESD, what our probable tax rate is going to be for the year. And that combines the WNESD and the high school. Again, we have come down to a 1.4142 for the WNESD. Now the high school has a budget of $7,672,000. They got $100,000 revenue coming in from surplus for a total of 7,572, and the equalized pupils are 385.03. That yields a education spending per equalized pupil of $19,600. $666. And if you divide that by the 15,479, which is the yield, and which is constant across the whole state, you would get a rate of 1.2705. Now, what happens here, you have to blend the rate that you finally pay in your taxes, because part of it is the high school and part of it is the WNESD. And the way they do that is by what is the percent of your pupils that go to the high school, and what is the percent of your pupils for the equalized pupils that are in the WNESD. And for Grafton, that is 51.42% belong to the WNESD, and 61.72%, 0.6172, or to 48.58 belong to the high school, totaling 100%. So you multiply that times the two rates, and that gives you a 72.72 cents for the WNESD and 61.72 for the high school. Now, the next kicker is you have to divide that by the CLA. Grafton's CLA this coming year is 0.9795. So you divide that into the two rates above, and that gives you a combined rate of 1.3726 for our tax rate at the best possible scenario. And that is compared to last year of 1.4671, which is down by 9.457 cents. So there's going to be a reduction in the homestead tax rate. And if you are non-resident, there probably will be a reduction there as well, because that's a statewide number that's calculated and determined by the legislature. And I would expect it to be down by 7 to 8 cents over next year. Now that's Grafton. I also did a look for Athens, two towns here. And when you do the split there, again, it's the same percent homestead equalized tax rate of 1.4142 and 1.2705 for the high school. But Athens split is 59.01% for the WNESD and 40.99% for the high school. So when you add those two things together and divide it by their CLA, and their CLA, because they haven't reappraised in 10 years, is 0.8764. So that has a negative impact because you're dividing that into those rates, which means it increases the final combined rate. So their rate will be at a good 1.5465, and last year it was 1.6279. So it should be down by 8.14 cents for next year. So look, that's the good news. And at a worst case, I would say they would be up by 1 or 2 cents at a worst case, which I don't anticipate, and Grafton would be up or down at a worst case by about 0.0019 cents, which is break even. I mean, is there any questions on this?
A lot of math, and there will be a test at the end of the night. One of the things that people need to understand that Hardy's really made very clear to people this year in his really quite impressive study of matters, how little the actual expenditures affect the bottom line tax rate. There's so many other variables, how much money the state brings in, what the common level of appraisal is set at. When you add all the factors, our contribution is less than you think. It's not really, a dollar spent doesn't show up on a dollar on your tax bill necessarily. It's a more complicated formula, and as one of my colleagues from Rockingham said, we're trying to game the system, and I'll explain to you how. There's a bunch of other articles here, articles 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they're talking about the fact that we do have an operating surplus. The SU has a surplus that they really shouldn't have had. People may have known that there were some problems with the SU's financial office a year or two back. well, the money that we have a surplus as a consequence, and that's coming back to us. And we have the situation where we have nearly half of our total student population is in 4 grades, and the other half is in 8 grades. So that tells you the direction things are going. So if we're in a situation where revenue to the state is going to be titrating down by 3% a year, how do you make sure that taxes aren't automatically going up 3% a year no matter what else you do? And one of the ways you do that is you take the surplus and you fill in your anticipated gaps for the next several years. And that gives you time for your student count to recover, or for us to figure out what we're doing here as an elementary school long term. So you'll see in Article 2, or excuse me, Article 3, as Hardy said, applying the sum of $75,000 out of the fund balance of $350,000 to reduce expenditures for this upcoming year. Article 4 talks about reducing it in the fiscal year 2025, and so on and so forth. The reason for this is we want to balance things out. If you cross a certain threshold, there's a penalty for crossing a threshold of too much expense, and it's an expense figure that's premised on the fact that every district has to provide certain services, but God forbid you actually pay for those services, because then you're assessed a penalty because you can't do it as efficiently as a small town as you can, say, Burlington. This gives us a way of avoiding that penalty out for the next several years, and it's I've said in my note to in the Grafton News a while back that you consider this like a fiscal grader. We're filling in all the ruts going forward so that we can provide predictable tax rates over the next several years. I think that was largely your idea, and it was a pretty good one. So that, but we need your permission to do it. And so you'll see, as I said, that's what 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all about. And that's pretty much everything on our warning, with the exception of the fact that we didn't pay the district clerk any money in 1 year, and I suggested that we've had such trouble getting folks to fill these seats because it's a lot of work, that we modestly bumped the compensation for the board members up a little bit, particularly the SU board, because as I said, that joint venture requires a lot of work. It's almost as much work as being on yet another board, and anybody that's going to do that, we should give them our appreciation. Are there any questions about either of those things?
On Article 2 or 3, you had over $300,000 in surplus.
Yep.
And you elected to take 75,000 of that.
Yes.
What was the reason why it couldn't be 100,000?
The main reason we did that was to balance out the tax rate, because the tax rate is going to go down this year from what it was a year ago, and we're saving money so that, because our equalized head count is going to continue to go down unless we get more people moving into town with kids. Okay, right now, we have, I estimate next year we're going to have 40 kids, real kids, in this school next year, and we're going to have another 14 in the 7th and 8th grade. So that's 54 students versus that 73 we're talking about. Now you get, by the state has an equalized formula for calculating these students, which changed last year, and I don't understand quite how it's done, but that's one of the things I want to do this next year, is figure it out to see what really is our equalized head count. Because by law, the state can only take it down by 3.6% next year.
Both Hardy and I think we made an error. And since we pointed out errors for 3 years in a row, I'm kind of I'm gonna bet fairly strongly that we're gonna be proved right, that they've underestimated our number. But to your question, why don't we just save all the money right now? Why are we pushing it ahead? Because if we cross that threshold by $1, we have to pay the state another $1. And you're paying $700, if we're $700 over the threshold, that means instead of just paying for what we owe, we now have to pay the state another $700, and it goes on and on and on. This is a better rate of return than you get in any bank, from any form of investment I can think of right now, is by pushing money forward in this fashion. We're going to save you serious money the following year and the following year after, probably the year after that. More than sufficient to do it this way. It literally is. Every $1 that we save by doing this, or every $1 we push out saves you $1, is the way you should think of it in terms of future costs.
You're talking about $700.
Hmm?
You're talking about.
I'm saying that right now, year to year, right now, we already went up $700 per pupil. All right, those kind of costs are not controllable because the state is titrating down the amount they're going to compensate us each year. So our cost for a student is going to continue to go up, no matter what else we do. It's literally hardwired in the system. We don't want people paying a penalty for being a small town. And this is the way we get to avoid that.
How close are you to that threshold?
We're right on it. So that's why, in fact, I think we're a couple $100 over this year.
See, one of the other keys here is the yield factor that I mentioned, which the legislature is recommending. Well, the AOE and the director of PBR is recommending $15,479. Now that's up significantly from last year. Now the reason they're doing this is because they have a giant surplus at the state level. Now that surplus may go away the next year, and they could take that 15,479 yield and reduce it. And it's all in the legislature is the final one that determines what that factor is going to be. But we have a cushion now, so that we should be able to manage our tax rate for the next couple of years as we decide. You can't keep running a school with 40 kids in it. I mean, long term, right? So that's going to be something we're going to have to look at. We need kids, and we have to figure out what we're going to do.
Go ahead.
Chad and
Yeah.
Art, with the number of variables there are,
Yeah.
why are we deciding now for year 2025?
Partly because we know that at minimum, we're going to be losing at least 3% in the way of students. So we've got a hard build into the system right now. What would be the equivalent of a 3% increase in your tax rate. And if we cross the threshold, that number could go up significantly. So what we're trying to do is essentially, I've used that snowplow grader analogy. We're trying to fill in those holes, because if you miss by even a little bit, it's a lot of money. As I said, we as a small school live right on the knife edge all the time. We will be doing that for the foreseeable future. So the way that we can avoid paying a penalty for being small is to manage your money as cagely as we possibly can. And when we do have a surplus, use it to push forward. I can't tell you for sure that we're going to have money to push this out to 26, but I think you make a solid assumption that when this board comes back to next year, you're going to ask you to do this and push this out yet another year, because I think we'll be able to do that. But after about then, I don't know what happens. And so we're trying to give everybody fiscal stability and ability to plan, and hopefully to attract a lot of folks to a wonderful town that ought to have more young people in it. I mean, this is a little off subject, but this issue about not having young people in this town affects more than your school. Who's going to run your fast squad? who's gonna run the volunteer fire department if everybody in town is, you know, AARP members? Because we do need to do whatever we can to bring young families into the community. It's long-term viability, not of just your school, but of your whole town depends on it.
Jack, we've had a number of young families move into Grafton since
Well,
COVID.
Well,
And their children are choosing, their parents are choosing not to send their children when they're school age to either the elementary school or the high school. And that's one of the fundamental issues. I'm not saying we should get into it tonight. I'm just saying that is one of the fundamental issues we need to come to grips with as a town.
some of that's also your next.
You know, one of the things that's going on right now in the legislature is they're proposing that you can only tuition students to public schools. And we would have to choose 3 public schools where they could go.
Yes.
And that would eliminate the problem we just talked about.
So we,
Anyway.
yes, as I say, it's
Yeah,
not the subject of
Well,
tonight's
actually,
meeting, but
it'll be
I
a
just-
good subject for, I hope, some joint meetings between, the, select board and the, and the school board. One of the things we did this year is we did have a community meeting, and I hope that, your future select board and future school board will make it, make it their mission to meet at least once or twice a year. I think it'd be good for everybody.
I also want to say, I think we hope a lot of people move to Akron.
Both communities. Why don't we, if questions are done on the elementary schools, why don't we just briefly touch on the high school? We may have seen a lot about the high school in the papers, and we don't have a rep right now at the high school. So Andy Haas is our superintendent. You don't know Andy, community, Andy, and you might want to talk about what's going on at the high school.
So, yeah, Mr. Broadley couldn't make it tonight, so I'm going to try and pitch it a little bit. Essentially with the budget, the high school budget is up $360,000. And the majority of that increase is, we settled, 2 agreements, one with the teachers and one with the support staff. And, those were large increases. And then also the health insurance that's mandated, that would, you know, the state sets the rate. So those were 2 large increases. The other increase was in utilities. And so when we were proposing the budget last year, oil was pretty cheap. And obviously it's gone up and electricity has gone up. So we've tried to budget responsibly in that area. So those are the larger areas of increase. There's no increase in staffing, of anything of that nature. The high school, as well as all of our other districts, did have a $900,000 surplus, and so we are proposing putting that into a capital reserve fund. The purpose for that is, you know, our high school is 50 years old, and it's had very little work done on it in that 50 years. And so we are utilizing ESSER funds to try and do some of those work. We're looking at, we're in the midst of going out to bid on an HVAC system to finish up the HVAC system at the high school. We are looking at a redesign of the high school and how we can utilize the areas, including the science department, which has been inoperable for almost 2 decades now, where students haven't had gas and water to do labs. So we're trying to upgrade that and bring that up into today's standards. Upgrade the auditorium, put in some security features with the entrance area. So we're looking at using a lot of the ESSER funds to try and push that cost off onto the federal government. But at the same time, we know that there are additional costs that we're not going to be able to, because the ESSER funds have a limited lifespan. They run out in September of 2024. And so any project can't go beyond that using those funds. So if what we're working with architects are giving us plans that we can come back and we can set monies aside in the futures and work towards those different pieces. So we're not going to try and do it all at once, obviously. The other I think big piece in the articles is there are two bond proposals. Both of them are for $2 million. The first one is for the driveway and the parking lot. If you haven't been to the high school lately, it's in pretty bad shape, with potholes and whatnot. And it's been patched many years, and it really needs to be addressed. My understanding is a few years back, it was on a bond, but a town, not this town, didn't get it on their ballot. But, you know, to give you a cost estimate, that was about $1 million project a few years back. It's now over, you know, it's around $2 million for that same project. I spoke with an engineer today who was talking about another project. Costs have gone up 55%. So any job that we were even quoted last year has gone up 55% this year. So we're really trying to look at how we can control those costs. The other bond is for the roof. We are looking at also the potential of using ESSER funds to pay for the roof. But our concern is doing a roof project and doing an HVAC system project at the same time. We don't want to lay down a roof and then come punch a bunch of holes in it to put the HVAC system in. And so it's coordinating all of that. Again, the HVAC system, we were quoted at about $2 million or just under $2 million. They're floating around $3.5 million now just for the same product or project. And today an engineer wouldn't even touch a number for me. And so it might be floating up to 4 million. And so what happens is all these other projects we want to do, we've got to make some really decisions. Where do we want to put that money in? And I think knowing that the high school hasn't been touched in so many years is to try and bring it up to speed, so that, you know, it's a good learning environment for our students. So.
People may have seen in the news some discussion about facilities, because the state of Vermont has not released money for facilities renovation in 15 years. And as a consequence, there's a lot of facilities that are in real trouble. Several of my colleagues went with me to the high school and saw violations in that building that were really problematic to fire safety. The folks over in that we live in Gray have been facing the same thing, and there was recently an article about an eye-popping bottom line cost for renovating Green Mountain High School, which is probably in the best shape for 3 high schools, but it's still looking at an eight-figure number to renovate that building. So if you have a chance to see your local representatives and talk to them about doing something that's a high priority, you might want to put it in their ear that it's time to get some money to renovate these buildings, because it shouldn't be coming out of local taxpayers' money. It shouldn't be property tax money. It's part of the state's obligation to fund education. So, are there any questions about any of that? Yes.
Maybe more of a comment. Being on board with education is not an easy job in any time, and even in good times. But with the long-standing financial issues that our supervisory union has presented to us, what is an unfriendly, maybe harassing atmosphere from the State Board of Education regarding our education system locally, and with continually declining enrollments. You know, you all have had really horrendous challenges before you, and I know some of you, and while those challenges are still in place, still agreed to fight the fight on behalf of the rest. I mean, otherwise we have to be sitting there. So I really appreciate the fact that you were willing to take on the challenges and stick with them. So I just wanted to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody,
ESSER funds that you've been referring to?
So, in all, there were 3 grants. So there was an ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and then ARP ESSER, or sometimes referred to as ESSER 3. The supervisory union received just over $20 million of all 3 of those funds. And so like the first one was don't quote me on the numbers, 1 point something million. The second one was about 5 million, and the third one's about 12 million and change. So
Might want to know where that money went to and what it's for.
I can speak. So ESSER 1 was all about recovery. Like, so we were buying a lot of, PPE, what can we do to keep the schools clean? Because we didn't know at the time. That money came out right away. So a lot of that money was spent on just getting the schools, back in the building, with able to get students back in and provide remote learning and things like that. ESSER 2, a lot has been spent on recovery. So we've been really focusing, we had to focus on a recovery plan and developed our recovery plan, which involved what are we doing for academic success or loss of learning? What are we doing for social emotional well-being of our students? And then what are we doing on engagement? Those were the 3 areas we had to focus on. And so this year we've spent a lot of our funds on not only on certain projects around, like one of the projects that is in that piece is the playground for this area. But we've done nature-based learning. We've done work-based learning at the high school. We've funded additional remote abilities to provide remoteness. But then we've also looked at what can we do to shore up our students' mental well-being. And so as kids have come back from COVID in a pandemic, we have found that they are 2 years socially behind where they were, their peers were before COVID. And so we've spent a lot with mental health and putting a lot of pieces in place to support that.
So are your ESSER funds, they have stipulations of how they're being used?
I'm sorry, say it.
Do you have stipulations on how the ESSER funds are being used, or is it, at one time the town received money and it was very specific what was used, and then they opened it to just about anything applied.
Yeah, we still have a lot of constrictions on how we can use them. And so we had to develop a plan and submit that to the state. And we continuously update that. Part of why the bond for the driveway is in there is because they told us ESSER funds can't be used for the driveway, even though we know that the building is a community area and it would bring more people in and, but we can't find that COVID connection for them on stuff of that nature. The ESSER 3 or ARP ESSER are really, they encompass all the previous 2, but they really want you to focus on infrastructure, a lot of it. So that's why we are looking at a lot of these plans of, they opened it up a little bit with security. So we are looking at enhancing security at all of our buildings. So like the front door here, but then adding additional cameras in buildings because if the federal government saw that as an appropriate use of those funds.
So were the ESSER funds split on throughout all the schools in that school, or how did you?
So as a committee, we would meet and discuss what are those needs and those greater needs. So they weren't divided up like Grafton has 39 kids, and so you get X amount of dollars kind of thing. It was based on where, as a greater need within the SU, did we see the needs for those funds. But each building, one of our big things we did was restorative practices. And so every building got personnel that's being funded by that. That's, as we move forward, it's one of the things we're very much aware of, that how do we sustain that after ESSER goes away? But there's each building has gotten pieces of it.
Two addendums by mine. One of the reasons why, people around here know that I've been campaigning for a while to make sure we have somebody on the high school board is because that the high school is potentially the largest recipient of that ESSER three and infrastructure money, but these are common pools, money is allocated to SUs. So to a certain extent, you have to have a seat at the table if you want to have a discussion about how the money's going to be divvied up. And it's important that we've been fortunate because this board has certainly advocated for what we need for this school. We're well represented on the SU, especially now recently. And so we've been able to direct some of that conversation, but that starts changing next year here at the board, that we have people willing to advocate for the community. Just to amplify on the ESSER one, things like all those lunches that were driven to people's houses, all the tabs that went out to the kids so that they could work remotely, and some of the infrastructure that went to make that possible for kids in places like, the upper road in Athens, in places that maybe weren't exactly broadband friendly. That money went to that, went to summer school. A lot of it is going these days to a lot of our counseling programs that we've set up. So that's how that money is accumulated. The next big bolus, as Andy said, is on infrastructure. And that's one where all the towns, all the districts, all have their own laundry list. But shaking that out, it's going to really happen in the next couple of months, to be perfectly honest with you. And it's important that we have people there advocating for both our two communities.
I think one thing, Jack, also to point out that we ran into with the ESSER funds was this building, because when Act 46 forced the merger, if you remember, the town bought the building back and then is leasing it back to the district now. Well, when we went to try and apply for funds for this building, it all got rejected because the district doesn't own the building. And so Jack had to jump through, he pulled some strings and jumped through to show that we have a substantial interest in this building long-term. And to get the state to agree to that, because otherwise we couldn't spend a dime up here of federal funds.
Right, that was what that whole multi-year lease business was about. You all remember all of that stuff.
I thought the district couldn't own any real estate.
So the SU cannot,
Right.
but the district can.
Individual districts.
So individual districts own real estate. Yeah, the SU does not. So, and so like on Tuesday, we're going to be coming, just precursor, we're going to be coming to the board with the playground proposal, and I need to get board approval to expend federal funds on their property before I can expend federal funds in a construction, because theoretically, if something were to happen and let's say we decided we were going to build a new building somewhere, the federal government has an interest now in your building and your grounds, and they can demand their playground back or their dollars. So it's when you get into federal funds, right? This is what happens, and this is why a lot of people don't go after federal funds, because there's a lot of.
It's why when the Central got into it and Chittenden a few years ago, when they had a chance to get money for the playground, got into a big thing about the theoretical possibility that Donald Trump was going to come and take the playground back or something. I have no idea, but actually they ended up turning down the grant offer. I would please don't turn down the grant offer because we needed to put that playground back together for 2 years now, and I don't want it to be free. And I have sort of promised people that we're going to get the sucker in by beginning of school year this coming year, and I'd like to make sure that that happens. So, one more question.
It's a small one.
Yeah.
The PFA investigation at the high school, what is the impact on budgeting for the district with that? I mean, if we put in this great new roof and HVAC system and driveway, but if the air is deemed too dirty, Does that impact budgeting?
You're talking
for
about the
district?
PCBs?
I'm using the wrong, yeah.
I was like,
PCBs.
yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
No, that's a new one for me. So PC, so what, they were just in recently to identify areas that they wanted to test.
But just in the high school.
Well, they've been at Westminster. I don't even know if they'll come out here because of when this building was built. It misses all the times when PCBs were used. But what they'll do is they're going to come back and they'll do air samples in specific areas of the building. If those air samples come back, I use the term hot, then they will go back into those areas and they will identify building materials and areas like in those specific areas, and then they will test those, and then they will tell us the paint on that wall has PCBs in it. So you can mitigate, you have to mitigate, so you can encapsulate or you can remove. And obviously removal is like really expensive. The state has moved away from where they were with Burlington, which is closed the whole place down, right? And now they're moving to, so let's say this room came back as hot, then you wouldn't be able to use it. But then they've even changed that to say, well, you can use it for X number of hours during the day. And so it's a moving target, and the legislature is talking about raising that PCB levels closer to the federal level. So right now, Vermont is extremely low tolerance, where the federal level is much higher. But it's one of the reasons why the high school wasn't supposed to be tested until 2025. And so we got it moved up. We traded one school for another school to get it moved up because it didn't want to do this huge investment and then have it come back as a problem. So,
what was the source of the PCBs?
So typically they are in, what I'm told, any flexible building material. So caulking around windows, mastic that might have been used for if you've got the carpet or floor tiles, the mastic, and it's in, or those along the border of the walls, usually there's like a
Code base?
yeah, thank you. And so those tend to be, paint is also, I was unaware that paint could also be, it was used in some painting materials.
The big one for the high school is going to be what type of mastic would you use for that crappy brown paneling that you see all over the place in the building. And that's the one that I worry about that. I worry about the fact that that unlike the transformer that's just outside the building here, theirs is inside the wall, and how will encapsulate.
So the other piece, the other big one is lighting. So we have confirmed every single one of our buildings no longer have the lighting ballasts in there that have, because what would happen is when the light would get turned off, or would burn out, the ballast would still stay hot, and then it would release PCBs into the atmosphere. So those were all traded out within the last 10 years. So that's actually the biggest source. So we should be in.
So, any other questions? Because we've flew past that 45 minutes, I guarantee everybody, but going by 5 so far. And then if there aren't any other questions, and I'm not telling anybody that they shouldn't ask one, so we're going to wrap up and let the select board meet. I would just say that there is a community meeting relative to the high school on tomorrow.
Tomorrow at 7 o'clock is a town meeting or an annual meeting for the high school budget.
And then there's going to be a breakout to sort of discuss the school staffing, really get people to articulate some of the what they want to see in leadership, what the priorities are, and if you can make 2 meetings in a row, I encourage you to be there.
And Jack, just for clarification, the community meeting is at 5 o'clock, and then the annual meeting is at 7 o'clock. Yeah. So they'll happen one after the other. So
there you go. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.